These are characters who...
Wait. So I'm going to pin you down on this. So you do believe in love at first sight? Or you don't? Or you have? Are you saying you have no opinion?
No, I mean, I think like in the general sense, I'd like to believe something as to like love at first sight, but I don't think life is that neat. I don't think it tends to work out that way. No, I'll say no because now I'm sort of working through it. But in the romantic sense, I'd like to think there is a such thing.
Well, because like I think like, traditionally when people who like really believe in this are tapping into the idea that like you have a single soulmate who's out in the world.
Yeah.
And you encounter them, and your two souls like recognize each other, and you're just like, oh my god, and like nothing can stop you. You're meant to be together, and that's kind of what we're touching on here. Welcome, friends, to episode 374 of the Ink to Film podcast, where we read the book and then see the movie. I'm writer Luke Elliott.
And I'm filmmaker James Bailey.
And this week we discuss William Shakespeare's 1597 play, Romeo and Juliet. All right, James, here we are back in the world of Shakespeare. This is the first Shakespeare project we've covered since covering Hamnet. So I don't know about you, man, but I was definitely thinking about that project and thinking about the life of Shakespeare and him as a person. And yes, that account is largely fictionalized, but there's some basis for a lot of what happens, and it's kind of filling in a lot of blank areas in history. And I found I just like couldn't not think of that. So it's kind of interesting how much that has affected my reading of this one now.
I mean, definitely. Hamnet, in a sense, is a love story. There's like a love story element to it, at least. So, of course, I was thinking about like how did William Shakespeare approach love and like what did he see here that's so universal, because so many people know this story because they read it in school, and how kind of like prescient that is for people at that time period in their lives. Yeah. And I remember being struck. I mean, we can talk about history with the material too. Like I read it in high school and haven't read it since. I just remember being struck by how life and death these things feel, and of course like through analysis and talking about it in a classroom with a teacher kind of guiding the conversation and students all around, how it's still emotionally resonant, how it's still something that even on this read, as I read it, I was like, it's beautiful. There's a lot of beauty in this, and you would think it'd be like played out in cliche at this point, but it's still there for a reason.
It's interesting, man. It is widely considered like this deeply romantic play. This love story that is timeless. And I think in many ways that's true, but also notably this is a tragedy. There's a bunch of people who get killed, and it results in the death of our main characters. By the way, we're not worried about spoilers for Romeo and Juliet. We're assuming everybody knows the story. So it's quite tragic. Bad things happen to everybody basically involved, and you could make an argument about, is this really love? And I think there's a lot of evidence for and against. So I think this is something that would be fun to talk about as we go through it. Like how do we feel now versus how we felt back then? Because I agree. I also read this. I might have read this in middle school, honestly. I think this is like the first Shakespeare thing I ever encountered, and it makes sense. I think this is a good one to do it with because your main characters are quite young, and
very romantic. Lighting just shifted.
My lighting just changed like on its own. How strange.
Wow. Yeah.
All right.
Totally not planned, Luke. Sure. Changed to red on you.
Yeah. I wish I could recite some lines right now. Hark! What light through yon window? What? Is it changing? It's changing again. All right. I'm just going to ignore it and pretend that this is on purpose. When I read it and I was young and like, it really did speak to that period in your life where you're just full of all these emotions and everything feels so powerful and big, right? Like every person you have a crush on, it's like, oh my God, this is the person. This is my Juliet. We're star-crossed lovers. I think with age and maybe maturity, we start to look back at that and go like, maybe those intense emotions aren't tethered to reality as much as they're tethered to a lot of intense hormones and, I don't know, just not having a lot of experience feeling so strongly about people. And so the first time you encounter it, it just blows your mind and you're kind of drunk on it, right?
Yeah.
And I think you could look at this story in the same way, right? Because these characters are kind of ridiculous in some ways. Like Romeo in particular, the first time we meet him, he is obsessing over this woman, and they're like, dude, you're so in love with her. And he's like, I can't, nothing can keep me from her. I'm so obsessed. And they're like, maybe like talk to some other women and see if you still feel that way. And he's like, I'll never feel differently, you know? And then sure enough, he meets Juliet like that same day, instantly falls in love with her, and they're married within like 24 hours. So like just the rapid shift and of this guy's emotions is kind of absurd.
Yeah.
And then I think it says a lot about you perhaps as the reader or listener or the viewer of this play, in whether or not you think this is romantic and you buy into this idea of love at first sight, of fate, of like recognizing a soulmate and the moment you meet them, and like, do you believe this is how romance and love works or not? I think it's a point that people would probably argue, and has been argued a lot over history.
It's a cautionary tale to an extent of like, don't be so rash necessarily, but like you said, I think depending on the reader or where you are when you read it, you might find some way into it that feels like this is, first of all, it's like relatable, right? Whether you know, you said like it's your first time. It seems like it's close to their first time being in love.
Yeah.
And how intense that feels, and then how like nostalgic or identifiable that can be for some people, and how that can put you in those shoes of, even if you're elderly, you can read this story and remember what it was like to be that young and in love. And you know, people talk about young love all the time,
which we damn near are now.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah. Who's to say what elderly is? I guess we are. Yeah.
Maybe in the 1500s we would have been considered elderly.
Yeah. But you can also see like that idea that like, yes, maybe at times people feel like they want, that's like a wish fulfillment portion of their life too. Like they want their love to feel this strong. They want to, you know, feel that in whatever age or relationship they're in. And so in that way, I think it plays in all of those different fields.
Yeah. Well, you're definitely picking up on something that's there, because when I was researching a little bit of the history of this, which I should go ahead and say, there's so much about this play. There's tons of history. There's all these things that it's drawing on that I would need to go into and read them too, to like really have the full context. And I wasn't able to do all of that. That we're just going to be able to kind of like lightly touch on historical context for this. We're going to give our thoughts and reactions to reading it this time. But, you know, once again, whenever we cover Shakespeare, I just want to say, like, I'm not a scholar. Haven't committed my career to studying Shakespeare. There are people who have, and who you should definitely listen to over me. I'm just giving my take on it, revisiting it for the first time since high school. I did read that this largely owes to a poem that Shakespeare would have read called The Tragical History of Romeo and Juliet, which itself owes to an Italian novella, which also then owes to a lot of, like, historical tragic love storytelling. There's like echoes of Romeo and Juliet throughout all of history, going back to like Ovid's Metamorphosis and stuff. I don't know. This is what I was reading. But in particular, this poem is the most close because it's like a Romeo and Juliet. You know what I mean? So it's obviously quite close. And the key difference is that in that poem, it occurs over like 9 months instead of a few days, and it is quite clear that the poet is framing this story as a cautionary tale about like some teenagers who don't listen to their parents and reject parental authority and go against their wishes and then die. And when they die, it's like they get what they deserve basically for not listening to their parents. And so that was kind of the attitude of this previous version. And then Shakespeare takes it, makes his version in which he introduces a lot more complexity. We all of a sudden feel empathy for Romeo and Juliet. We feel sympathy for them. The idea of romance being like a powerful force that might actually be more important to you than your family ties is actually quite controversial in this era, where family and country are like primary in religion. All of those come into play here too, right? And in many ways, everything they're doing starts to undermine those elements of their lives as well. So this was actually considered a fairly political, or like a politically fraught story. And so people have theorized that that's also why he decided to keep it set in Italy instead of making it set in England, because this is something that people have noticed as a pattern with him, is that if he's going to tell a story that seems to be potentially politically fraught, like maybe you listen to your own heart over that of your family or your responsibility to country. That kind of message is going to be able to be kind of Trojan horsed in if you put it in like a far off land or long ago. And so he does that in some of his plays. And here it's like, oh, that's off in Italy where they do crazy things, you know?
Yeah, interesting. I always kind of wondered about that too.
Yeah. So he didn't invent it, though. So it's notable, right? This is Shakespeare, obviously, credited with this story, Romeo and Juliet, throughout all time. Like, I think most people are just going to immediately think, oh, that's Shakespeare's story. But, like, it kind of is and kind of isn't, right? Like, he made the version that is so famous that we all think about. But, like, he also was adapting something else. He was kind of adapting a poem he had read.
Again, we talk about with Shakespeare every single time, just like legacy and like what these what they've gone on to influence and everything. These are the kind of stories that are just like ubiquitous. I feel like everyone almost kind of comes out of the womb just like knowing what the context of Romeo and Juliet. Like you know about like the balcony scene.
It's funny. Speaking of the balcony scene, I read that in the original play, it's actually only mentioned as like a window, and her coming to a window. It being a balcony was only introduced after Shakespeare's death. It was in like the 1600s when there was like a resurgence of his work, and at some point in the 1600s, the balcony was introduced as a thing that they would do on stage and have her up on a balcony. Huh. But yeah, that wasn't actually necessarily the way it was originally performed.
Yeah, it's interesting to think of him adapting someone else's work or in some way creating a version of it when this
adaptations are very important.
Yeah.
It's almost the subtext of our podcast.
Again, just like you think of the retellings that we've seen in the modern era, and then just like how important it is on stage, and how I think young people do to this day. I mean, at least during our era, I remember this is something that I could talk to girls about, right, and be like, this is like a you're talking about poetry.
It is
almost
considered very romantic, right? Like the idea of someone blowing up their life and going against their family, and like both of them don't care about anything. They're like, I don't care if I have to die, I don't care what, like this is happening, we are in love, nothing can stop us. So that's a very appealing a concept to people, and I think that's why it is considered so romantic, even though it is so tragic for them and for everyone around them, really.
Well, I think the situation, like the idea that like they can't be together, like you said, star-crossed lovers before, like that, I think pulls, because we see
that
again
phrase star-crossed lovers appears in this play, and for the first time, I believe, and that is people see different evidence in here that Shakespeare is saying there is truth to the idea of them being fated for one another, or there being some sort of magic to this relationship, calling them that, but then also, I thought this was a cool thing. I encountered this in my research. I didn't notice it at the time. But when the very first time they meet, they exchange lines with each other. And I can't remember how many each says, but you take the lines they say to each other and you add them all together, and it equals exactly 14 lines in iambic pentameter, which forms a Shakespearean sonnet. So when the first time they ever speak to each other, they basically come together to form a poem.
Yeah. Like perfectly matching together.
Yeah, and it's cool. Like way Shakespeare sort of implies that they are perfectly matched for each other, that there is something magical happening here. And he does this a lot in this play. It is both really clever. There's tons of amazing wordplay. This is obviously kind of English we don't speak anymore. So in some ways it almost feels like we're trying to translate it out of another language. But you can get in there and you can start to suss a lot of the stuff out. So while there is a lot of clever wordplay and obviously, like, yeah, having a sonnet sort of appear, like, there's a lot of stuff that, like, lends itself to close critical analysis. And yet, it is a play full of sword fights, full of young lovers, of poison, of shocking moments, of crude humor at times. And it was designed for the masses, which is his main audience that he was playing for. He had to grab their attention. They were, like, standing for hours in these theaters. If you were in the pit, you're just standing there for, like, 3 hours. And you're in a big mass of people. There's no microphones on stage, right? So you just have to like hope that it's quiet enough in there that people can hear. If they're bored, they probably start talking to each other, and now no one's listening anymore. So like you have to command their attention, and Shakespeare knew how to do that. He knew how to tell an exciting story. He had sword fights. He had craziness happening on stage, and he had puns. Like people found this stuff really, really funny, and so it's just really. Oh my God, my lights are still going crazy in here. It's so distracting. Anyway, it is
in reading it like this time, I found myself a couple of times like chuckling, and it it can feel a little archaic or it can feel a little dated, but if you're just kind of give yourself over to it, which I say every time we read Shakespeare, is like as I start to read it, I'm like, God, it feels so clunky as a modern reader reading it. But at the further along I get, I start just going on at a pretty decent clip, and I'm like interpreting it a lot better, and
it kind of pulls you into that time period too, right? Like you feel like you're there, and
I sort of adopt an accent in my mind and stuff, and like really like deliver the lines, and I think it starts to develop. But anyway, I found myself laughing quite a bit, here and there.
No, it is funny at times, and that's another thing that he is known for, and that sort of displays some of his hallmarks, is he has a tragic story, and yet there's a lot of humor in this play, and especially like a lot of the early acts. It's full of humor to where you would be forgiven if you think this is a comedy. And in many ways, it plays out like a comedy.
Well, I mean, and that's the subversion of the time, right? Is like you don't necessarily, I mean, of course, like I'm sure word travels quickly, but like, it's a comedy or a tragedy. And it's like if you kind of play between the lines, people don't know what it is until the end, and it preserves that tragic twist.
I think it just was fresh to say, like, you're going to come to a tragedy. People show up expecting, like, all right, this is going to be a really serious play that ends in tragedy. And then he's telling jokes. There's body jokes and everyone's laughing. This is different. People weren't doing this. I'm sure some were, but like this is something he's known for, is his way to like masterfully welcome people in. And we think about modern storytelling and how like common this is now, right? To like have like moments of levity to like let pressure off the darker stuff that's happening. Like this is in all of our storytelling all the time now. And a lot of this is like, Shakespeare was one of the pioneers of this and realizing how effective it is. So he's, displaying some mastery early on here. So a lot of what we talked about, I thought this would be a good moment for us to make an announcement, actually. James and I are going to be doing our second ever live show this year. We are excited to announce that we are going to be attending NorwestCon, which is held in SeaTac every year, kind of outside of Seattle. And James and I are going to be interviewing T. Kingfisher, about her novel, What Moves the Dead. It's a little different for us. We're going to be interviewing her about it because it is a retelling. So speaking of retellings, this is a form of adaptation. It is a retelling of sorts of The Fall of the House of Usher. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to be interviewing her about that, asking her about the process of writing a retelling and retellings in general and her thoughts on adaptations. And that is going to be on Friday, April 3rd at 10 a.m., so bright and early, I guess. So if anybody's in the area, or if you're considering going to NorwestCon, you can come check it out. I think you can get just a single day pass, like if you're really interested in that. But also, James and I are on programming, and we're going to be on several panels throughout the weekend.
Yeah, I'm excited. We're on another one together, which will be fun.
Yeah, is that the Stephen King one we're on together?
Yeah, Stephen King one, which feels right for the podcast.
Lots of opinions on that.
And then you're on one for Shakespeare, right? That's like covers some of Shakespeare's adaptations.
Yeah, so I'm on one called like the best Shakespearean adaptations or something like that. We're going to talk about the best ones, and I'm like, how am I qualified to talk about this? But then I'm like, I guess I'm kind of qualified in the sense that I've at least covered some of them. But like that reminds me, this play has been adapted for film like 80 times.
Yeah.
Like it's one of the most adapted plays of all of Shakespeare's works. I think it might be the most adapted. So even that alone, like 80 for one of his plays, much less all of his. So like I don't think anyone is like fully gonna be qualified to talk about the best. I can just give my opinions on the ones that we've covered and a few that I've seen outside of the podcast.
Yeah, I was thinking about Romeo and Juliet in relation to Shakespeare's overall work, and I was like, outside of maybe Macbeth and Hamlet, what else is larger than Romeo and Juliet like in his work?
It's interesting. So I saw a list somewhere that put this at number 6. It's considered the 6th most popular play.
Wow. That's shocking because of the number of adaptations, right?
But it's also his most adapted play. So I don't know how you can really reconcile those two. I guess maybe they're going off of like times it's been performed, like maybe it's times it's performed or how often it's performed.
I thought it may be just critical consensus kind of
critical
thing.
Critical consensus,
like
yeah,
it
could be.
The scholars tend to feel about.
Obviously highly subjective and, who knows. But yeah, I mean, it is certainly, one of, right? And in a lot of ways, I always felt like Romeo and Juliet was his most approachable work. Like it makes sense to teach this to young people. And man, reading it this time, I was shocked at the number of just like iconic lines
so iconic.
And like Shakespearean quotes that come from this play. and it's chock full of them. And that's what I was seeing, is that it's like, it is that mix of like highly accessible, highly emotional. In some ways, it's almost melodramatic, and yet it's got lines that would like, become a hallmark of English literature throughout all time.
Yeah.
Which is wild to say, but that's Shakespeare.
All that's to say, we're going to be at NorwestCon. Luke's going to be on a panel about adaptations, so come check those out if you're in town or if you want to join.
Excited to do another live show, man. The last one was really fun. It's a high bar. I'm sure this will be very different. We're not actually covering like an adaptation the same way, but it should be a lot of fun, and it kind of expands a little bit of like this kind of thing we can talk about in a live show setting. So I'm excited to see how it goes.
Definitely, and I'm grateful to T. King Fisher for agreeing to come on and guest of honor at NorwestCon. So that's like a massive deal.
Yeah, she's the guest of honor. Yeah, so we're going to be covering that novel in advance of it too. So we will have context going in to talk to her if you're curious. So anyway, man, let's get into some plot. I'll just read it briefly. I don't want to get too far into it because I think most people generally know the plot of Romeo and Juliet, but in case you need a little bit of a refresher, we'll give you that and we'll move through it. So, Romeo and Juliet opens in Verona, where a bitter feud between the Montague and Capulet families repeatedly erupts into violence. After a street brawl draws in Benvolio and the fiery Tybalt, Prince Aeschylus threatens death to anyone who disturbs the peace again. Meanwhile, young Romeo Montague is heartsick over Rosaline, until he crashes a Capulet masquerade with his friends and meets Juliet. The two instantly fall in love, unaware at first of each other's family ties. When they discover the truth, the danger only intensifies their devotion. With the help of Friar Lawrence, who hopes their union might reconcile the feuding houses, and Juliet's nurse, the lovers secretly marry the next day. All right, so this gets into the classic opening sequence, and I think a couple of things that could be fun to debate here. How do you feel about this? Like personally, I'm not saying like what do you think is right as far as like cosmically?
Yeah.
But for you, James, how do you feel about these teenagers? Is this romantic to you, or is this like, how do you feel about it,
I mean, in today's day and age, and as a modern reader, as my adult self, of course it seems like very fast. Like I waited 10 years to get married, so there's that should be an indication in some sense.
So you don't believe in love at first sight and fated lovers?
It's not that I don't believe in love at first sight. If anything, it's that like I'm just a very like cautious, slow moving sort of person when I'm making a massive decision like that. And this is the opposite of that. These are characters who
wait. So I'm going to pin you down on this. So you do believe in love at first sight? Or you don't? Or you have? Are you saying you have no opinion?
No, I mean I think like in the general sense, I'd like to believe something as to like love at first sight, but I don't think like life is that neat. I don't think it tends to work out that way. No, I'd say no because now I'm sort of working through it. But in the romantic sense, I'd like to think there is a such thing.
Yeah. Well, because like I think like, traditionally when people who like really believe in this are tapping into the idea that like you have a single soulmate who's out in the world, and you encounter them, and your two souls like recognize each other, and you're just like, oh my god, and like nothing can stop you. You're meant to be together, and that's kind of what we're touching on here. In like a literary setting, I'm fine with this, as like a romantic idea. In real life, I don't ascribe to this. I really think that the idea of love at first sight is really lust at first sight. It's usually an immense physical attraction, which can be paired with you have a conversation with the person and you just really like jive with each other. I don't know what the right word is. Like you just like, you're talking and you're just like, man, they get me. Like we're on the same wavelength. I love talking to this person. Like you can have like a combination of the physical attraction and just like a personal relation attraction, right? Like this is somebody I want to talk to. I want to be around. And those two things come together and can be extremely powerful.
Yeah.
And yet that doesn't mean to me that there is something sort of supernatural going on. There is something with your soul. And it doesn't mean that that person is alone the only person you would ever feel this with. But that, I don't know. Like this gets into a larger topic of like, but does that mean you shouldn't like ever like commit to somebody because there could be somebody else out there that you would actually love even more? And that's where I think you can get into trouble in that line of thinking, because like, while yes, I do think that is possible, you also don't know that you'll ever meet that person. Like there's probably a ton of people that you might have that reaction to if you ever met them. But just like with how many people there are on the planet, like you're just not going to meet all the people that you might have that reaction to. And so you have to act on like your lived experience and who you actually encounter. And if there's a mutual attraction there and you are hitting it off, like go for it. Like I think that's romantic in and of itself. Like you don't have to always hold out to the next thing because it might be better. Sometimes it is romantic, I think, to lean into it. And it doesn't sound as romantic because of the way I'm talking about it as like almost like you're giving up or you're like taking a worse option. But like the fact is you don't know. This could be the one person in the world that you actually do have the best attraction to and interaction with. But there's no way to know that, and so there's a sort of a romance in accepting that unknown to me. And that's where I see the romance coming in. But like this situation, I see two infatuated teens who think they're each other is hot, and yes, I think they do have an intense interpersonal chemistry that amplifies this moment. I think Shakespeare agrees largely. Like I think he plays with this idea that they are star-crossed and they are fated. But I don't know. I was also detecting a bit of like, they're a bit young and foolish, and it gets them into trouble. And the fact that they're unwilling to listen to anything else or like consider any other course of action. Maybe we shouldn't think that this is the way we should all live our lives. I don't know. Maybe that's just me being a jaded adult now reading this.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it can be both to an extent, but like you're, the in the estimation of like, love at first sight, by definition has to be like before a conversation has even happened.
Yeah, usually you see somebody before you talk to them. That's true. Not always.
Yeah, that's
especially
true,
in the modern world, AIM and stuff.
True, yeah. AIM is the most modern technology that I'm using to communicate.
Modern stuff like AIM. Yeah, okay.
Anyway, but yeah, that idea of like, I think love takes work, and it takes like checking in and sort of like rekindling and like a effort over time and all that kind of stuff. So it's interesting as like an adult having gone through life, looking back at this. But I don't want to be the person that like puts their nose up and is like, oh, these stupid kids know nothing and they could never love each other. That doesn't make any sense. Because like I think there's something to be said about following passion. I think the story's also like we've seen with Romeo in the beginning. He's just, devastated about this woman, Rosalind, I think her name is, that doesn't love him. Yeah.
And this is the clear, obvious, to me, this is Shakespeare showing us, right? Like he already feels this way about somebody.
Yes.
He feels
and the whiplash of like immediately feeling the same thing for this other woman. And like,
it's like he's primed to feel this way. He's just like full hormones right now.
That's not to say that then that connection couldn't have been the most real possible, soulmate kind of situation ever.
And you could argue maybe his connection with Juliet just immediately destroys the other one and makes it nothing because it is so much more powerful, perhaps.
Sure.
Even though he's talking about them in similar ways, maybe one is really that much more powerful.
One of the things you talked about, like iconic lines, and some of the things that stand out to me too are like the personification or like the metaphors that are being employed, which is like, the thing I feel like you study in school when you read this play. Just how intense, like, Romeo is comparing Juliet to the sun or the rising sun, and just like how powerful that is and how like needed that is and vital that is and everything like that, and then like just the repeated usage. There's a few, like one that really stuck out to me this time that I thought was interesting is by the nurse, or maybe it's Lady Capulet, but she's talking to Juliet about the suitor Paris. And she's like comparing him to like a book or like a library, and just like how long that run goes. Even if he's just a cover, like that couldn't be enough, and all this kind of stuff about like checking the binding and the different clasps that hold the book together and all these, and like that run, there's a few of those throughout the story. There's one I think that I'll talk about near the end about death. I just am like, damn, this is so cool to have like it broken down in this way and to continue it. And it's for a character that like, the Paris character is obviously like the foil in a sense to Romeo, and he's like the almost antagonist in certain ways.
I mean, he seems like a decent dude, and he's mostly off page. Occasionally shows up, but he doesn't do a whole lot. It's just the fact that he is the one that she's supposed to marry, and she doesn't like him, so we don't like him. I want to touch in on something you said at the start of that. Where you were talking about comparing them to like nature. Mm-hmm. And this is something that happens a lot in this play. In my research, I was seeing people comparing this or analyzing this as a an indication of the conflict between the human love that they're feeling and, you go out one step and you have society. You have their families, you have society saying they shouldn't be together. And then you go another step beyond that, and it feels like the universe is almost against them. And they're trying to appeal to the universe, appeal to fate, appeal to forces beyond in an attempt to say our love is so important that it should transcend all of this worldly stuff, right? And this is it comes up in a lot, in kind of an aggregate, as you notice a lot of these lines. So I'll give you a few here. I have, my bounty is as boundless as the sea. My love is as deep. The more I give thee, the more I have, for both are infinite. So comparing love to the infinite sea. We have good night, parting is such sweet sorrow that I shall say good night till it be the morrow. So this is another time, in a similar way, they're talking about time. Time is another construct that they're constantly pushing against. Stuff like, I can't believe you have to leave. I can't believe it's not tomorrow already. I only get to see you in the next day. And so all these constructs of the universe are sort of conspiring against them, and they're constantly pushing against them too.
Not to mention the time thing and the eternal nature of some of the things you're talking about too is like an irony of how short their time together actually is when we get near the end of the story.
Yeah. Do not swear by the moon, for she changes constantly, then your love would also change. It's constantly reaching out to these things that are greater than you.
Yeah, I like that portion a lot too, because there's somewhere in there that Romeo compares Juliet to the moon, and she's like, don't compare me to the moon as it's ever changing and everything like that. Compare me to something. He's like, what should I compare you to then? And
yeah, so many good ones, man. But let's move on. I guess anything else here at the start, in this first section you want to talk about? Oh, I'll talk about something. Him and his bros are quite the little rapscallions going around picking fights, talking trash. They're giving him hell. They're razzing him over this feelings he has for Rosalind. They're funny. They have a lot of really funny wordplay lines. But yeah, I've seen elsewhere that people have actually read this as being somewhat queer coded. Who knows if this has any sort of historical precedent at the time? But modern readers have looked at this and said this interaction feels somewhat queer coded. Again, I'm not saying I ascribe to this. It's just funny the amount of things you see when you're looking into all the different critical analysis out there and you're skimming through it. You're like, oh my God. So yeah, that was one I saw, particularly among these friends, Benvolio, Mercutio, and Shakespeare, Romeo.
I just like the way that this story starts out, where Romeo's in the dumps. They're all kind of messing with him and trying to get his spirits up and say there's more fish in the sea kind of thing.
Yeah.
And then they intercept this letter. And they're reading it, and they're like, "Oh, a party, huh? Look at all these people. All these cool people are going, and it's our enemies. Let's crash this party.
Let's put masks on, and they won't be able to tell." And then it's hilarious because they show up in mass the very first time they speak within hearing distance of Tybalt. He's like, "Those are the fucking Montagues." He can hear it, and he knows immediately.
Yeah.
He's like, they're here to crash our party. I know they're here.
Yeah. Well, and they're all down to fight at all times too. They're like, it's probably time to fight, right?
Yeah. Tybalt is absolutely down to fight. Him and what Benvolio, even Mercutio. They're they want to fight. And that's the other thing too. He's with his boys, and his boys are looking to fight. They don't care about this romance. So I feel like that kind of creates this dynamic too of he's like, I'm trying to hit on this girl, man, you guys need to chill. But they're like, no, we're not gonna chill, we're gonna fight, Yeah. And they constantly kind of causing more trouble.
It's funny too, because I was thinking a lot about the greater lore of these two families are obviously just rival, at odds, enemies, and I'm like, but what led to this? Why is it so intense and fighting in the streets immediately kind of thing? And then the only thing that can stop it is the prince shows up and he's like, I'll kill you guys.
Well, one of the cool things about this is because it is kind of vague and he's touching on sort of ancient storytelling. People have been able to take this and in all the different adaptations and versions of the stories over the years, the idea of two houses at war can be changed to a lot of different things. And often this becomes a race situation where people from one race, West Side Story is kind of based off of this.
Sure.
There's all these different versions. I was reading about a modern take that was set in the Middle East. And it was these different factions, and it was a Romeo and Juliet retelling. I forget the name of it, sorry. But and it was, they were able to take different like religious sects, and like that represents the two houses that are at war. You know what I mean? You just get two factions who are at war, and someone falls in love between each of them, and then the tension between that greater conflict and now this love, and unfortunately, I mean, it's a tragic story, so usually it's about that love not being enough. But we'll get there when we get to the end. But like, it does change things, so it like has an effect, even though it's tragic for the characters who do it. The houses reconcile, and they sort of learn from their mistakes as they lose their beloved, Romeo and Juliet.
And that's the tragedy of all of it. It's funny. We were just talking about, I mean, fuck it. We were just talking about A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, and how like there's some things that happen in A Song of Ice and Fire where like, you think what if, and it's like these tragic things happen, and you're like, what if that hadn't happened? Like what could have gone on? And here we see these two families that if they could just get their shit together, stop fighting, and allow these two people to be together, they, the other end of the coin is they die.
I can't even remember, but like there's two houses in Game of Thrones. They're like famously like this. They've been fighting each other for centuries.
Oh yeah.
I can't remember which ones they are.
Is it the Brackens? Is it?
The Brackens and somebody else. It might be the Brackens.
Man,
I can't remember, but like
I think it's somebody in the Riverlands.
Yeah, they're like not huge houses, but also like one of the reasons they're not huge is because they have been killing each other forever.
Yeah,
they're kind of set up like this, and then there's also like the American South, Hatfields and McCoys, right? And this is like a real thing that happened. But, a lot of people look at this as kind of a Shakespearean tale, too. The Hatfields and McCoys, you can be viewed as the same way as, like, the Capulets and the Montagues. And it just comes up time and time again, and then it becomes a very fertile place to tell stories, I think.
Yeah, and then so we talked about cautionary tale at the beginning. I think it's cautionary tale for, like, young people to look at this and say, like, don't be too hasty, follow those passions and things. But also the cautionary tale of ideological differences, right? Like, this, like, it's, like, what you may regret down the line if you can't reconcile some of these things. And so like, at the end of the story, we get these houses are actually able to like come together and kind of mourn the death of these two people.
How long will it last, I think, is to me an open question, but they seem like they're committed to it. Let's continue on with the plot here. So the fragile happiness collapses when Tybalt challenges Romeo to a duel. Refusing to fight his new kinsman, Romeo instead watches his loyal friend Mercutio accept the challenge, who is then fatally wounded. Enraged and overcome with guilt, Romeo kills Tybalt, violating the prince's decree. He is banished from Verona, devastating Juliet just as her parents arrange her marriage to Count Paris. Desperate to avoid betraying Romeo, Juliet seeks Friar Lawrence's help. The friar devises a risky plan. Juliet will drink a potion that makes her appear dead, be laid in the Capulet tomb, and awakened after Romeo retrieves her so that they can flee together. The scheme hinges on Romeo receiving a letter explaining everything. So, that doesn't end up happening. So, But yeah, what do you think of this part? The duel, the death of Mercutio.
You early on noted like Romeo was so much more involved with like the relationship. Like he wanted to talk to Juliet. He didn't care about all this fighting, and he kept not really being involved in the fighting. And then, there's this feud that happens. He tries to jump between and then gets his friend killed. And then due to that, then he feels like I've failed as a man in this situation, and I've failed my family. And now I have to, like, I think this is like kind of the crux of the story here is where he decides to get retaliation and goes and kills Tybalt. And that leads to like some, a cycle of things that he can't prevent anymore, and this sort of spiral to the end. If he could just have stepped out of that moment, or if these families could have stopped fighting, or if these kids weren't so like young and bloodlusting, and
there's a lot of stuff outside of his control, honestly, and there's a lot of bad luck that happens too.
At the beginning, you asked about like how I feel about it as like a modern reader. One of the things that we haven't really talked about much is that like just how young they are too.
Yeah,
like I always kind of assumed they were a little older, but I think they say that like Juliet's like maybe 14, 13. Somewhere in that range. 13,
she's 13, yeah.
And that's really fucking young. Like I know that like times were different back then. Yeah.
Yeah. So like I think traditionally I was reading that this story, like in the previous version of the poem, they were like 16. But the issue with them being like 16 is at 16 at the time is more similar to like 18 in our time, in the sense that they were considered adults. And so you could sort of blame them for their actions. You could say like they kind of chose this themselves and they get what they deserve. By aging them down to where he does, it makes it to where it is difficult to blame them for what happens, right? Like, they are so young, especially by today's standards, but even for the time, that was considered quite young. Obviously, they're talking about marrying her off, so, like, times were different. Deeply misogynist and patriarchal society that this was taking place in, but in many ways, you can see this as sort of a, again, like, kind of stealthy critique of this entire situation and this entire system that maybe Shakespeare was engaging with. Hard to say for sure.
Yeah, it's possible. I can see that. Thinking about this from Juliet's point of view too, because I feel like we talk about it from Romeo's a lot. Like, she's so young, she's drawn into all of this. She's so in love with Romeo. Then Romeo kills her cousin,
Yep.
and then there's this interesting sequence where she's like distraught over the death of Tybalt.
For a minute, she's like cursing him. She's like, "Damn it! I thought I loved you, and you did this. You killed beloved Tybalt."
And then it quickly like morphs into, but also Tybalt could have killed Romeo, so this is kind of the better of the two outcomes. And
she like thinks it through, and she's like, "Well, he was kind of defending himself, and he did kill his friend. You know what? I'm sorry I ever said anything bad about you. I love you so much, Romeo. Forgive me for ever saying a negative thing about you." Yeah, the wild turn of emotion is kind of funny in a sense, right?
Right. But just thinking about it from Juliet's point of view, like, it's like what she's like, you know, she's being pulled into all this turmoil as well. The sneaking around that they're doing is kind of mutual, and I you know, at the beginning, and then they have this night together. Which, have we gotten to that yet?
That might be in this section, yeah, where they kind of, you know, implied off scene, off page consummation of their marriage. You know, this is the other thing that people have pointed out is that this isn't a Shakespeare thing, but like throughout all of storytelling into the modern day, you have a young woman who ends up having sex with somebody in a story. She's probably going to die. This becomes a big stereotype. And you know, it goes all the way back to here. You know, Shakespeare didn't invent this, but like, I don't know. Yeah, there is something to be said for, like, did they somehow condemn themselves by having sex, right? Like, it's kind of like, yes, they get married, which in some sense, like, makes it a little more, like, acceptable in the eyes of God. But in a deeply religious time, they're going against their parents. They have sex. They've violated a social norm. And now they're going to die.
Yeah, and we kind of jumped over some of the wedding stuff. So two things that I want to talk about, or two people that I want to talk about, is like there are a couple of adults involved in all of the situation. One being the nurse and the friar. And like, how much are we to like put blame on them, or because they didn't necessarily like cause this to happen, but they facilitated it.
Yeah, they both have their own like culpability in it for sure. The nurse seems to really value Juliet and like what she wants. And their relationship, I guess, over time. And the friar really wants there to be a reconciliation between the two houses, and he thinks that this might be able to lead to that. You know, they have other motivations too. They're actually pretty complex characters, both of them. But yeah, he's the one who marries them. He says a really iconic line here, which I want to read. It's kind of this ominous line. He says, "These violent delights have violent ends, and in their triumph die like fire and powder, which as they kiss consume. The sweetest honey is loathsome in his own deliciousness, and in the taste confounds the appetite. Therefore love moderately. Long love doth so, too swift arrives, as tardy as too slow." So he's giving them, I guess, some advice here. But yeah, calling these violent delights having violent ends is quite prophetic of the story that's to play out, and also an iconic Shakespeare line.
Very iconic, yeah. It was cool when I read that portion. And like, but also calling attention to the idea of like, you know, being hasty versus being more methodical about all of this, and I think obviously that's a nod to the audience of like, hey, this is kind of some of the morality of this story. Like, hopefully you pick up on some of this.
There's one part I want to talk about here in the middle that I thought was funny. So I heard this in the audiobook, because the way that I consume this, I listened to the audiobook, but I also pulled up the text. I was able to get a copy of it through the Libby app, like from the library, for free. And I think this is the way to go if you're not going to like watch the play, is to listen to it so you can hear it being sort of performed, which helps a lot with the like intonation and the context of what's going on, but then also read it so you can understand what's being said. But this part, there was a difference because the audiobook version included this line, but the written one didn't. And so I was like, oh, that was curious. And I'm curious to know if you even had this line. 'Cause did you do something similar? Like, how did you consume this?
Yeah, I found a like YouTube playlist of somebody reading it, and then I also have my physical copy in it, so I kind of did both at the same time as well.
Okay. So I'm curious if your version had this or not. So this is Mercutio. He says, "If love be blind, love cannot hit the mark. Now will he sit under a medlar tree and wish his mistress were the kind of fruit as maids call medlars when they laugh alone. Romeo, that she were, oh, that she were an open arse, or thou a poprin pear."
I think I think that was in
The
mine.
open arse.
Yeah.
Did you hear that and go like, wait, what?
Yes, I did.
So I looked and I noticed open arse, like that phrase was in the audio I listened to, but it was not in the written text. They omitted this line.
I'm wondering if that, like, because I thought there was another use of arse in the story other than that, but maybe.
Well, there's a couple different parts. Yeah, there might be another use of arse because there's a lot of this like kind of body stuff. So I looked into this because I was like, what are they talking about here? And it's weird. Like it is body in a way, but it's not the way you would think.
Okay.
So there was this fruit called the medlar fruit, which is what he refers to here, and there was a vulgar slang name for it called the open arse, but it was because it resembled a female genitalia, and it would often rot before it turns ripe. Don't know what that means exactly, but
What?
it has like a weird, like it's strange. Okay, and then also the poprin pear, which he says like, oh, thou a poprin pear. Is because that one resembles a male genitalia, and it also sounds like pop her in.
Got it.
I don't know. So he's basically making a sex joke. Oh, that she were this, and that you were a popper and pear that you could like get together. So yeah, he's making a crude joke about sex and comparing them to these two different fruits. Yeah. Anyway, that got cut from part of it. Open arse is an interesting name for.
I was gonna say that.
a fruit.
Yeah. Well, not to mention that's an interesting name being talked about in place of female genitalia. It's like a wild
strange.
Jump
Something has not translated throughout time for that one, but this is something people would have known, right, in the era. They would have heard this and probably thought it was quite funny. So anyway, that part happens, and that's the kind of stuff that like I don't know, I find that interesting. Also, you can see why like. Sometimes people might choose to omit this. They're like, oh, we don't need to be teaching kids about this or having them ask questions to their teachers about this. So let's just cut this line.
Yeah, it's like the archaeological dig here that we're doing. I like covering this kind of historical stuff for that reason because it's fun to like. I didn't know that. It's interesting context.
Yeah. All right, let's wrap this up. So fate intervenes when the message never reaches Romeo. Believing Juliet truly dead, he buys poison and returns to Verona, where he encounters and kills Paris at Juliet's tomb. In his grief, Romeo drinks the poison and dies beside her. Moments later, Juliet awakens and finds Romeo dead and kills herself with his dagger. The double suicide shocks both families into confronting the devastation caused by their feud. Faced with the loss of their children, the Montagues and Capulets finally reconcile, ending their long-standing hatred at the terrible cost of Romeo and Juliet's lives. All right, so that's what we were talking about a little bit already, touched on that. But what are your thoughts on this final scene, the most famous of all, right, where you have Juliet, who is quote-unquote dead, because she's taken this poison that makes her seem like she's dead. Romeo is supposed to get the message to let him know this is the plan. He never receives that. Instead, he thinks she is dead, fights with Paris, kills him, and then in his grief over the loss of Juliet, kills himself with poison just as she wakes up to see what has occurred, and then she kills herself, and double suicide. Quite dark ending here.
Yeah, it is a dark ending. The whole sequence, once we build up to taking the kind of sleeping drop, Romeo getting poison after he hears about that, like all that stuff is interesting to me. I feel like this friar is to blame for a lot of this. Like you got to have backup plans. It's a pretty elaborate plan. It's an elaborate plan, but also like, can you have a backup plan? Can you also like maybe get there a little faster instead of Romeo somehow making it to the tomb before you?
Well, he sends like another friar, right? We were talking about this a little bit beforehand. He sends like another friar who gets delayed on route.
Yeah, so much of this could have been avoided, and it's such a risky play.
Well, and also I was saying a lot of bad luck is befalling them here for sure too.
when Juliet goes to take this, she's like, maybe what if this friar actually did just give me poison? And she's like, you know what?
Yeah.
It can't be. It couldn't be. I'm just going to take it. And she just like decides to take it, showing that like she's, she's willing to go the distance. And even if it was poison, she was willing to risk it. I mean, once it gets to the tomb, it's really exciting. I think, Paris shows up and he's got guys on the outside and he's like, whistle if you hear anybody coming. And then Romeo shows up and Romeo's telling his friend, he's like, this is a letter from my dad. If you come down in here and you try to stop me for what I'm trying to do, I will tear your. Oh, this is one of my favorite parts of the personification too. He talks about how the graveyard is hungry and how he'll take all the bones and feed the graveyard and try to satiate the graveyard, and like that kept is kind of a run there as well that I loved.
Yeah. Well, and there was like the whole thing was like Lord Capulet, I think, has this whole thing where he's talking about death being his inheritance, his son-in-law. I wanted her to marry Paris, but now she's married to death. Like that is my legacy. That is, it's a really kind of epic. Obviously, I don't have the exact line, but just like the grief being displayed, but also just like really cool writing, powerful stuff.
Yeah, he says like death is his daughter's suitor, and he's come and she's now married to death. It's really that was one of my favorites, that and the graveyard portion. Anyway, so we're getting into the stuff where eventually Romeo fights Paris, and Romeo doesn't even really understand that Paris is like supposed to marry Juliet. This guy is down here at the tomb. He's in my way. He's trying to prevent me from going in here. Romeo basically is like, just don't stop me, okay? I'm going down there. Don't worry about what I'm doing. Just don't stop me. And this guy's like, I will stop you. And he's like, you want to stop me? All right, then they fight to the death and he kills him. He's so enraged here too. Like he has such a mission in mind, and he like, between how he interacts with his friend and how he interacts with Paris is like he's so committed to this, and he's just like blinded by rage or by the death of his loved one.
Yeah. So what are we left to think about this, right? Like the tragic loss of them. It does cause a reconciliation between the houses. Yeah, I don't know. How do you feel about it? Is this a love story?
I think from the perspective of the characters who tragically, like they believe in this sort of afterlife where they may be joining each other too. Like,
is it saying something about this love is like too pure to exist, or like our world can't allow it to happen? Or
I definitely think it was overlooked. Like I think it was something that they underestimated, and like it could have been this beautiful love that no one wanted to happen, and then on the other side of it it's this tragedy.
Sure, yeah, like maybe the fault could lie in all the adults and all the people in their lives who are unwilling to set aside their grievances to allow this to happen. Like they should have just accepted this love between enemies.
It's such a tragedy that they die, and that's I'm sure it was so impactful for the audience at the time, and it still is today, that they die. And I guess the only silver lining that's really there, like if there's any happy ending to be had, it's that like these families reconcile a bit.
Yeah, they kind of learn a lesson, right? And that's the ultimate way that we're left with it feeling like a little bit satisfying, is like, yes, they died, but at least maybe these houses now will stop killing each other constantly. Like somebody can learn a lesson from this.
Well, and the way that they kind of trauma bonded here, and at least the dialogue at the end made me think maybe they'll be like close now. They have more in common than they have apart, and that's how I read the ending, is that maybe they will become close family.
Yeah, we can only hope. Whether or not that's true, I don't know. It depends on how cynical I'm feeling. But if you enjoyed this episode, you actually have our patrons to thank. And we want to thank them too, because this was our first community-chosen project of the year. We do 4 of these per year that you can vote on exclusively on Patreon. And this was the one that won the poll. We are going to be covering the 1996 Baz Luhrmann, is that the director?
Baz Luhrmann,
yeah, adaptation. This is the DiCaprio one where they have guns, and it's this is a movie I saw when it came out, but like have very little memory of. Very very interested to rewatch this now as an adult, and especially after reading the play and like see how I think about it.
Yeah, this is an interesting one for me because I feel like I don't know that I've seen this film all the way through. I think I've seen part of it in a class, like in school. Okay. So I really don't know that I can even say that I've ever seen this before. I vaguely remember some of it. So kind of a first viewing for me. I'm excited.
Nice.
Baz Luhrmann is an interesting filmmaker. He's, Moulin Rouge and like Great Gatsby more recently, that Elvis movie that came out.
Interesting. I'll be curious to learn more about him. I did want to say, if you wanted to affect what we're going to cover in the future, you might consider joining our Patreon. That's where you're going to be able to vote on upcoming projects. We also have bonus episodes that we release on there every month. So definitely check out our Patreon, patreon.com/inkToFilm.
And be sure to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, Blue Sky, TikTok, all of those at inkToFilm, and we're on pretty much every social media platform.
And make sure to join our Discord. That's where we take suggestions and we gather them all together to decide what goes onto the polls. And the way to do that is going to be a link in the show notes. So we'd love to have you join our Discord.
And thank you to Ross Bugden for the use of our intro and outro music.
All right, that's going to be it this week. That's going to be it for Romeo and Juliet, the original play. And now we get to see the film adaptation. And I'm excited, man. Yeah, like you said, this is going to be new for you. Be a revisit for me, I think. I'm pretty sure I saw this movie all the way through back in the day when it came out. But, man, it was a long time ago. 96, I would have been 11. So I probably saw it, maybe I was 12 at most when I saw it. But been many a year, so I'm excited to revisit it and see which one we end up liking better. But yeah, thank you all. If you're a patron, thank you for your support, and until next time,
keep adapting.